Go live here. Hello, welcome back. Welcome back to, the same place that I always am, which is standing at my desk on a Friday at 10 a.m.-ish. I started a little bit late this morning. Oh, so I'm kind of like, this summer has been super busy for me. If you guys have been following my personal page, it's because I am doing a fashion show that is kind of having me like get out of my comfort zone and really kind of support this topic that I'm going to talk about today, which is the relationship with self from not only just my perspective, but the role that I serve as a therapist with people who are recovering from addiction and some of the like little fine-tuning aspects of that relationship development in therapy and what therapy kind of is, at least therapy with me. I can't speak to therapy with any other therapist. I just tell my clients, please try not to compare unless you contrast at the same time too, because I do things differently based off of the experiences that I've had in my clinical roles and all that. And then also in my non-clinical roles. But that's here nor there right now. So let's get into a very brief synopsis of like, if you're trying to do this work, but you can't really go to therapy or you're not really ready for therapy, like what are some things that you maybe want to consider when it comes to the relationship with self? So remember, kind of the context is that if you're struggling with any other kind of relationship, whether it be a relationship with a person that's not necessarily healthy for you, relationship with a substance, food, gambling, whatever the case may be, right? A relationship with something outside of yourself, the relationship within yourself is ultimately going to be what needs to be solidified for that to not have as much control, for the lack of a better term. So relationship with self in the different areas is really important. So kind of aligns right now too, because in my group community, we're just finished kind of like the first round of my curriculum of Fresh Perspective. And we're kind of going back again. And the topic that we were talking about this week was taking inventory. And so just like if you were any kind of like a job, right? Like, and you were in a manager role or a leader role, you would be taking inventory of the items that in your store. And you are your business in your life. I don't care if you're a business owner. I don't mean it in that way. When you live your life, you are your business. You have to know ultimately what you're dealing with at different stages of your life, let alone different timing of your life. And because you may have been out there experiencing life, going out and having fun, playing a little bit, and then having some time to really take like, okay, what did I collect in terms of experiences, memories, lessons, all that while I was out there? So taking inventory. So if you want, the first thing is taking inventory is like, if you want to do that, the way that I encourage people to do that is looking at like a couple of different perspectives. There are 3 inventories that I keep on my website and in my app. And the first one is the 8 dimensions of wellness. So when we're looking at overall like improvement in well-being, there are 8 different areas of wellness that have been identified that kind of all together form a solidified happiness. It's the inventory that I started with. It's inventory I still do from time to time. And because it goes through and it actually makes it and conceptualize steps that you can take. So if you're not quite there, if you're not feeling connected with your life, if you're not where you want to be in alignment of where your goals are and what you wanted to accomplish, that these have like different actionables. You can use them as steps. So I'll link that. Hey, Lydia. I'll link that in this description of this on my YouTube channel. And then hopefully I'll come back and I'll link it in my Instagram video as well, because that's like a really good guide. Like if you just look at that one inventory and you're willing to be uncomfortable in rating yourself, kind of like a quiz. This is why I love inventories, because I used to love cosmopolitan quizzes about like, how sassy are you? I don't know, whatever Cosmo Girl or Cosmo had in their magazine when I was growing up, or Teen Girl. I used to love these quizzes. And now I'm at my level, it's like, oh, okay, I just need to kind of quiz myself and check in with me and see where I'm at. So that inventory is one. Another inventory I encourage people to look at, which is a little bit more intense and intimidating sometimes is the codependency recovery inventory. And so that is because once you kind of understand what mental well-being is that we're all codependent. We're all addicted to something because it's really just a relationship in your chemicals that in your brain that have to a situation or a thing biochemically, but then also the meaning of that thing to help you feel better. Then you can understand that codependency is not going anywhere. It just needs to be rebalanced. At least that's how I speak on it. So codependency inventory will give you a better idea of like where the imbalances are in the different areas of codependency that have been laid out in, years and generations before me and before I started using it. And it's a good indicator of like, oh, okay, I'm doing this. And I tell people, give yourself like the last 3 to 6 months of reflection of like, oh, I'm doing this. How is this playing out for me? Do I like that I'm doing this? The same way that you would be evaluating a partner and a person that you want to be in a relationship. Do I like when they do this? Do I like when I do this with them? Right? So there's different tiers of like looking at how you like something in your life and whether or not it's getting you the results that you want. So that inventory specifically is kind of how you take a look at like, okay, what's happening around me? What am I doing? What is happening? What is something that's being done to me? And where is it bringing me? So that codependency inventory is really looking at that relationship, not only with other people, but then that relationship with self as well. And so if you're able to work independently and you have that individual accountability to put that time on your schedule and go kind of integrate that into your consideration of the day. You don't want to do it all at once because it's a big inventory. And I think it's got like 6 different sections, whereas the first inventory had 8. That's a little bit quicker though, just because it's a little bit more vague and about general wellness. I put the codependency second because I'm increasingly kind of getting closer and closer to self. So the kind of work that I do, that in-depth, trauma-focused recovery, identity work, gets closer and closer to emotions. But if you wanted to if you feel like you're good with your emotions, you understand them, start with a wellness assessment. If you are having more struggles with your emotions, but then also doing things that you are not happy with or you feel shameful about and you're having a little trouble balancing that emotional stuff, go to your codependency inventory because that will show you a little bit more about you. But if you really want to get if you have to start with the emotions and really develop emotional intelligence, the third inventory I use is just a really brief, quick emotional intelligence questionnaire. Where are you scoring in terms of what are the different components of emotional intelligence? So those are my 3 inventories that I encourage anyone to kind of use on a regular basis. How the frequency, that's completely up to you. I'd say at this point, the frequency I use them is probably once every few months, every 3 to 6 months maybe, where I sit down and, if I'm taking a look at, I probably need to do it again soon, because if I'm taking a look at what's going on in my life, how am I reacting to it versus how do I want to respond to it? And I have to look at okay, what am I attached to here? And what am I missing? So those inventories can be very helpful to kind of prompt you to get out of your head. Same thing that sometimes a lot of people go to therapy for. I am ultimately holding you accountable to those particular insights about yourself and walking you through those. So if you always have the option to be involved in an individual relationship with a therapist who will help you do that. But then also, if you don't necessarily, you're not ready for individual, which ironically, most people get more scared with group therapy than they do with individual. But that's what my group community is about. It's more of a therapeutic accountability community for people who need to kind of ease in and do their own work, working independently, but around people who are doing that same kind of work. So we go through those inventories. I monitor the scores for my clients because, ultimately, it's not that I'm doing something that you can do yourself. I'm doing something that a lot of people, that takes a lot of work to document, to track, to do all of the things that a coach does, that a therapist does. That's ultimately the role that I serve for people. So I earn my keep around here, okay? So that's kind of when you're talking about that relationship with self, where how do you grow a resilience? How do you Keep yourself away from the extremes in your thinking and in your moods, because these are the little kind of finite, minute skills that kind of get overlooked when you have an apparent lack of understanding about how things impact you and how you impact other people. And honestly, it just comes back to your parents cannot be perfect. Even an emotionally mature parent cannot understand every single aspect of their child. There's not enough time in the day. And so if we talk about there's not enough time in the day, when I hear a lot of people say that, it's not to get all the things done. It's to pay attention to everything that happens. There absolutely is not enough time in the day to monitor every single thing that happens in your reality, let alone someone else's reality, like a child, that you can only just do the best you can and be able to sit back and kind of evaluate and assess and inventory. Okay, what's going on here? What was missing? What did I just do the best I could, at age 3, but now at age 7, they're having really big struggle with big emotions. Where was I at that point? So the next point I want to make when we're talking about the relationship with self, when you start doing this work, is how do you understand the past versions of yourself and the development that you had during those periods of time? Now, what I'm trained in, what I paid for in terms of my degree and my education, was understanding the different theoretical models of development. That's just one area of that. And psychoanalysis, all that. But Erickson's stages of development, you can Google that. It will give you the different kind of like structured perspective of stages of development when it comes to the different phases of our lives. And you kind of have to assess. I did this in my journal early on. I was like, okay, let's see. Okay, trust versus mistrust from age 0 to 2. Because I had trust issues. I was seeing lack of commitment in my relationships, lack of commitment in my goals, and to attending to myself. So I went back and I was like, all right, let's start this over. Case study, Sara Wilder. And where did I, at age 0, and now I don't remember, I don't have any particular memories of 0 to 2 years old, but when you take a look at what generally could have been going on during that time, I asked my parents, what was going on for you guys at 0 to 2? Well, they were about to prepare for divorce. So when it comes to, and this is why it's a vulnerable conversation, because I will use my experiences and my recollection, how does that impact a child? At age, I was 2 years old when they divorced. So ultimately, you can assume, you don't want to assume too much, but you can assume that if someone was preparing for divorce when I was 2, that the year and a half before that, things weren't joyful. Things were not energetically supportive. Okay, so when my parents are stressed, me as a child, me as an infant, this is where maternal mental health is very important to understand self and your impact, because you're literally having a child more cling to you physically more. There's a transference of energy. So if you're stressed during your pregnancy, that's going to affect development of the baby. That's going to, bring forth potential issues, not necessarily problems. I don't want to scare y'all, because all of this can be, not all of it, but a majority of it can be corrected, but it's going to impact how a child develops, not only biologically, genetically, but also behaviorally, emotionally, because now once they're in the world, all they have to do is learn. And if they're learning from a chaotic situation, their brain is going to adapt to chaos. So when I look back, I kind of had to fill in a lot of things just based off of my own knowledge. And I don't mean memories. I didn't create memories for myself. I created an understanding. So when you take a look at those past versions of yourself in each different area, generally kind of just intentionally check in. I actually did this this week, and partly why I'm talking about it this week, not only for my group purpose, but my own work. I was going through something. I was experiencing a lot of big emotions, and I was like, what is this? I couldn't figure it out. It was prompted by a relationship that was in my life, and I was just like, why am I reacting this way? And I had to get very quiet with myself. Thankfully, I had a lot of driving to do because I was going back and forth to DC for practice and rehearsal, because we're 1 month out from the fashion show. And this development, this fashion show has been, for me, a testament to like, okay, you've been working very hard on yourself, Sarah. So, but in terms of my physical body and my mind, but it doesn't mean that my mind doesn't have associations with doing certain things. So if you think about the modeling world, there's no requirement to be a certain age. But for me to be 35, I'm on the older end. So I'm a non-traditional model because there's a lot of girls and women who get into modeling from a career standpoint, and they start young and they go, and it's a refinement. It's a whole skill. Modeling is very challenging. It's not just so easy, like you just walk in heels and it's natural. No, there's a lot of technique to it. One of the coaches, I watch her and I was like, yo, she's been doing this for a long time. She's got it down to a science on how to hold people accountable to paying attention to why these things are important. And I just admire that because you can tell not only has she been through it, she's also done it professionally from the outside looking in, but also the inside looking out. Let me get back to the whole point here, is that when you are going through and you're experiencing a life challenge, understanding your reactions and attachments to certain things in those particular times are important to show you kind of invertedly what developmental stage and lesson you're practicing over again. And so for me, what I was considering this week, and I also got a lot of confirmation on, because at first I was just like, no, I'm just making this up. For some reason, I went back to age 14. And if I tell you really what I was doing, you'll be like, Sarah, okay, that's a little weird. So there'll be a story for another time. But I went back and I connected. I was like, what was I going through at age 14? As a teenage girl, the circumstances of my external world, I had already adjusted to the fact that my parents were divorced. I have a pretty decent relationship with my stepmother at this point. So it's not like I had any kind of, parental discourse that I really needed to understand. My mom and I were going, moms and daughters go through stuff, right? But those were pivotal moments where I started to realize like, 14. Well, let me trace it back to what I know significant life events that impacted me did happen. At 16, my father passed away. So it's like, if I backtrack to 16, he was diagnosed 10 months before he passed. So there's almost a year. So that's me being 15 now, and then I'm like, 14 is only 1 year more ahead of that. So at 14, there's likelihood. So it started making me realize my father's behavior started likely changing around 14. Then I think about, 14, I was a sophomore in high school because I'm a little bit earlier from my graduation. And I was able to track back a memory. This one did include a memory where I think he was already diagnosed, but I was playing softball at the time. And he showed up to my practice, and it's starting to be different. So if you guys know anything about my story, my father had a brain tumor that affected a lot in his temporal lobe, which is a lot of memory, behavior, just, oddities and, in life. So for a teenage girl to have a father figure start to kind of lose it, for a lack of a better term, or do things that are embarrassing to them, it was very socially impactful. Okay. So I'm not going to go super into my story because I don't necessarily want someone to get lost in my own trauma or trigger someone else's trauma. But when you start to take a look at those past versions of yourself and you link what you do remember sorry, disclaimer, I would recommend you only do this in the safety of a therapy session with your therapist. But you can also do this outside of a therapist, but I would highly recommend that you already know how to self-regulate and to self-soothe. Because when you do this kind of work, you have to understand that movement of energy and that concept of mindfulness. And ultimately, because this is where talk therapy gets such a bad rap, is because we're just talking, and we're resaturating our bodies with trauma hormones, which is really just cortisol and potentially just fight or flight. And we're not actually practicing the healing techniques of self-regulation, self-soothing for talk therapy to really help us move along, which is why I see people, you constantly are like processing and venting with your friends because you're like, it's part of my healing process. No, you're re-traumatizing yourself because you're missing a fundamental foundational component, which is how do you regulate that energy and provide calmness to your central nervous system while processing trauma. Okay. So what I was doing when I was processing this kind of 14-year-old empathy session for myself, because I was like, that was where this particular emotion kind of brought me back to, is that I was actually walking in a circle. And I was in a pool, so it was tranquil, it was safe for me at the most part, and I was processing in a way, but I was also moving. I guess you could call it pacing, but I was walking in the water in a circle. So if we bring the mindfulness perspective in real quick, the water, I could feel some resistance on my ankles because it was a very shallow area of the pool. And I could hear the water, me walking in that circle, I could hear the water moving. So I stayed grounded. I stayed connected to my senses. And I was able to go back and think about and walk myself through this period of time where at 14 years old, I was like, damn, girl, you were going through it. Like, and being able to create an empathy for yourself, that is where you start healing that inner child, that inner teenager, that inner different parts of you that got hurt. So whatever you want to call it shadow work, you want to call it healing your inner child, you want to call it therapy, whatever. It's healing, right? I don't care how you do it, just do it. Because those are the parts of you. So I'm going to kind of zoom back out into like present day, because I'm clearly not 14. I'm about to be 35. It was 20 years ago. But once I had that moment where I was like, oh, no wonder I'm reacting this way. So my present day reaction where I wanted to tell someone, no, you can't do that. You're this, that, you're that, you hurt me, you. And I want to stay focused on the trigger versus go in and understand what is being pulled. What is the part of me that is reacting in that moment? It was the 14 to 16 age young woman that I was, and then this happens, right? That was still reacting to potentially losing her father. Excuse me. See, and it's kind of unexpected, which is why people don't always like to do this work in front of people. Because, and I'm moving a little bit more, but I had to stop it because I had to move that energy through me with my breath, because I don't have as much room to walk and move my body. But that is regulation. That's that old stuff kind of coming up. And being able to bring yourself back to, you're not creating a character that's not authentic. You're making sure you're being intentional about how you want to be in this moment. I guess, I never really thought, I'm like, okay, well, how do I want to cry on video? Because I never thought that, that would be, actually, I kind of did. Role modeling is part of that, but it's like, I never anticipated, I don't know what time I'm going to cry in public. But I can tell you, when I first started in my career, even when I first started speaking publicly, at the time, it was a worry for me, because whenever I get emotional, you can ask my mom and you can ask my brother, and as well as my stepmom, but she doesn't get on me as much of it other than my mom and my brother do. Whenever I get emotional, I start to cry. I'm a crier. Cry when I'm happy, cry when I'm laughing, cry when I'm sad, and cry when I'm frustrated. So whenever I was experiencing big emotions, and before I actually took the time to develop myself personally, I know the professional stuff. It's merging the two and also keeping them a little bit separate at the same time, because not all my personal life needs me to be a professional, and not all my professional life needs to be personal. So, and was I able to build a buffer from my emotions impacting my speech? Speaking up for myself has always been something that I've struggled with. I was very shy. I used to eat as a way of coping. So words and dealing with conflict. So I just started to be and identify more with introversion. If you need to understand a little bit more about that balance, like I had to balance my introversion and my extroversion if I was ever going to make it in my career and focus on obtaining my goals of being financially secure as a clinical social worker wanting to help the world. Statistically, they don't make a lot of money. So I had to find ways to be able to present myself, to be able to bring and, scale myself. And if I was crying in the middle of my public speaking because I was talking about my emotions, that ain't gonna be good. It's not gonna be good. It's gonna make people uncomfortable. And it's also not a boundary that I had to protect people from absorbing my trauma and into them. Because my main goal has been to reduce the trauma footprint. So if I'm out here just being like, yeah, my dad died and I really feel like it was something like pivotal and it da-da-da, and I'm just talking about myself without any respect to how people are personalizing that story, how it relates to people, because I know it's going to speak to people. But if I'm not mindful of that, and this is why I challenge when it says, don't care what anybody else thinks or about you or like what they think about you and or what they think in general. I challenge that because perspective has brought me, it's just brought me a lot of transformation. However, you can't learn without other people. I don't know what the back of my hair looks like. So someone who invented a mirror has helped me out today, and I couldn't do that by myself. I didn't invent mirrors. I just like looking at them. So it's like, if I want to know what the back of my hair looks like, or the camera, what's it look like? Y'all good? Good? Yeah. So if I want to know what people and what my impact in this world is going to be, I have to value perspective. Now, that's just for me. I do encourage perspective to be valued by other people, but I can't force it on you. So you eat it on your own accord. But it is imperative that when you're doing this work and you're talking about healing and the things that you want healthy relationships, you want money, you want wealth, you want financial security, you want whatever. It's not in just doing what you think is right. It's understanding what you think is right and what works for other people as well. Because relationships are a fundamental part of this world that you cannot get by. Technically you can be a CEO and not value relationships, but I can guarantee you're so distanced from the concept of the impact that you have on this world that you just think all the haters are out to get you. That's the personality constructs that I teach people about, how they, narcissism. That's a narcissist, right? You're around them all the time. I prepare people to how you deal not only with your own, because we're all narcissists in some regard, unless you do that work to be able to contain and put healthy boundaries within your own mind and with your emotions, for you not to be a taker, for you not to understand your impact on other people. And that's the difference between recovery, which is what it's a sum of what I've just kind of found that's worked, and in not only in my life, but is the difference between, if you just put this in the context of a substance, is the difference between sobriety and recovery, is that you understand yourself to the point where you naturally are in a lane that not only people can come and go as they please, but that you don't lose parts of yourself when they do. The reason there's a lot of reasons I want to talk about this, but one of the main ones is that when we experience, there's going to be so many constants in life. Change is one of them. Loss is the other one. That when we have losses around us, we have become so enmeshed, which is natural. That's okay. Like, a mother is dependent on having a child to be a mother. You don't necessarily have to, when you think of it, you can argue differently, but a true biological mother is not a mother without a child that she birthed. There is no natural boundary there. They literally one grew inside the other. But development, when it comes to human emotion development, social development, it is imperative when you start to learn and implement the conceptualization of boundaries intellectually and emotionally in that type of relationship. Because if anything were to happen in that relationship that you can't control, that you're going to lose a part of yourself because you've not actually been prepared for loss. We fear loss, which is what limits preparation. We fear one of our parents dying. I didn't really think, if I think back to like when, because I have experienced a parent dying at a time where it was unexpected, I had no preparation for the matter, which is why it took me so long to figure this out. Thankfully, and at the time, if you guys go back and read or watch my other video about the foundations of faith, I didn't have a higher power at that point in time, but for some reason, I ended up going into social work, going into clinical social work, going in and pursuing. Thankfully, it was me chasing my traumas. Did I ever get to a point, and then it was like, oh, well, I was already kind of messed up. I couldn't stay in a job for very long, and I just jump. Did I find myself in a place where I was actually able to start paying attention to like, why can't I keep a job past a year and a half? Well, I could keep it. I just went to another one before I got bored. I was challenged. Someone else challenged me, and I wasn't in a place where I was accepting the challenge. I was not in a place where I had the emotional resiliency to stay there and deal with the conflict appropriately. I didn't have the skills. I wasn't able to even teach my clients the importance of communication skills because I wasn't in the right settings to actually implement them myself. And it wasn't until I found, private practice or, entrepreneurship, did I realize when I had to take full responsibility of like my schedule, of how I spoke to people in terms of maintaining my clients, coordinating with people, managing my time, and then making the mistake of over budgeting my time, did I realize that my relationship with self was severely underdeveloped. So at that point, that's when I started paying attention to the number on the scale, because that's what shows us. That's what weight is. Why my brand is Right Size Perspective is that there's no number that defines the healthiest version of you. It's just how connected and how aligned you are with what health looks like in your life, what wellness looks like in your life. And if you're burning out, if you're struggling with a recurring depression episode, if you're getting a diagnosis of borderline or bipolar or anything like that, then you have become very misaligned. You're out here just kind of up and down and fluctuating, and you don't know why, because you've not understood yourself to the point where you don't have to sway that much. I use the metaphor, the pendulum swings. If you're swinging from one side to the other, then there's no tension here with your body, because your body is like, you're all like this. Your weight's up and down, your trust issues, relationships, you're not learning. Your brain is not online to provide you and to feel safe, right? So that relationship with self, that's how I can tell people it's underdeveloped. You're overcompensating in one area. I learned this actually from an injury I sustained, is that because I became aware right at the right time to start paying attention to when my body hurt. I was like, so I was playing softball and I injured my foot. And did I realize I was compensating with my gait? And what happened is that my hips became displaced. And it's all on this side too. And now I have a shoulder issue, and then I injured this shoulder because it was actually weaker, even though it looked stronger because it was swollen and inflamed. And I was like, but it was actually weaker because I was compensating from 3 years ago. So once I actually started working on recovery for my body, I started understanding the mind-body connection. This was even during my journey. And I already understood the importance of movement to help me regulate my hormones and my emotions, so that fluctuation wasn't it started just going like this. And then I was like, I'm dependent a little bit too much on movement to regulate. Where's the emotional stuff? And then I started doing this relationship with self-work. It was kind of right at the same time. Then I realized, anyways, getting back to the understanding the past versions and ages of you and how they show up. I'm 35 years old, and I just had a conversation with the 14, 15-year-old version of myself. I didn't see anything. There was no auditory visual hallucinations. No one talked back. I promise. Well, at least I don't think so. But it was in my voice. It was under my consent. It was under my regulation. And I received a message from this self to my past self that soothed a part of me, that allowed me to realize I don't need to be loved in this way. I just needed to be loved by me. I needed to be seen by myself, not necessarily by the person that I wanted to project that onto, that I wanted them to do differently so I could feel better. I am responsible for my own happiness. And this is where it's tough. You can be in relationships and do this work, but the risk you run is that person developing themselves the way, or something, a way similar to how you're developing yourself. Because at a certain point in time, you're in any type of relationship, you have to deal with hurt and loss. You're going to lose time. You're going to lose space. You're going to lose your own self in some ways, because you have to make a choice about who you're bringing into and who you're exposing yourself to. Are they going to be adding that value something that you may want to work on that they can teach you, but you have to be the one intentionally learning about them and know that you're going to be exposed. And that does mean about their bad habits, or you're exposed to their bad habits too. And so if from the very beginning, a lot of times, and I've made this mistake plenty of times, I'm an all-in type of person. I will love you where you're at, but my toxic trait is that I will also want you to change to love me where I'm at. And that's the lesson that I had to learn this week. I've been doing this for, well, not exactly this for 10 years, but I've been in my career for 10 years, and it's taken me 10 years to actually learn the importance of being able to know where I am and where I'm operating out of psychologically at any given point in my day. Because the only reason that I have that education, and you can have it too, and it doesn't mean that you have to go back and get a master's degree in social work, it means that you just have to start listening to yourself. You have to literally hear the words that you're saying, how you're saying them, and then the emotions that are attached to them, for you to be able to know what past versions of yourself are playing out old patterns and old scenarios. And once you adopt that mindset of like life as practice, you will be able to make a more conscious decision. Doesn't mean that you have to change anything, but you'll be able to, if the narrative is not working for you, if you push, so coming back to my own example, that if you end up pushing people away that scare you or they make you feel unsafe, and then I don't like that narrative where I just go in a different direction and avoid it. I like the narrative that I can stand and know who I am and not keep avoiding certain particular exits and skills in my life that are going to make me a whole, more complete person, a more secure person in who I am psychologically. So that does include that there's sometimes like, oh shoot, something's coming up here. This person's evoking something from me, and I want to put it on them, but it's actually, hold on. And it took me a few days. It wasn't just this representation of where I'm at right now is where I'm like, okay, let me think about this and let me reflect. Oh, okay, it's a 4. No, this took me days of mulling over, of disturbing my own peace for just a slight bit. Thankfully, I have healthy distractions that get me out of my head and not overanalyze that. But if you're doing this work, you have to be able to go inward and see like, oh, it's not 35-year-old Sarah, 34-year-old Sarah. It's 14-year-old Sarah that really needed to see that, when she's seen, that she deserves to be seen and valued. And that had to be by me before it can be by anyone else. Okay? So if you have the opportunity and you want to change the narrative, you can. But that decision making, it's an intricate process, because sometimes, and let me say this as well, is that this happens all the time. We just cycle all over and over again because we're never fully healed. Like I said before, early on, you cannot do everything all at once. So if you miss this opportunity in the moment and you do end up avoiding, because I've done it, in some situations naturally have to be avoided because you don't have the skills to deal with such a large lesson all at once, that you will still meet another person that evokes something in you that triggers you. And you have that other opportunity coming to you already to do this development work throughout the process. There is no stopping your life for therapy. Please, oh my gosh, do not do that. Do not just be like, hey, I'm in therapy. I am going to not see anyone. I'm just going to isolate myself. That is not healing. That is avoidance. But you may need to take some time away from, if you're single, like dating. Yeah, you may need to just take a break and slow down and really be like, okay, what am I working with? Taking the inventory. And then what is it that I want? The only way that you're going to know whether or not that you actually want something is if you identify what it is that you want and then you go try it out. Just like I thought I wanted a cheeseburger the other day, but I really wanted a burrito because it did not hit the spot. I didn't go get it right then, but I realized like, oh, maybe when I'm in the moment what I want, I actually have to go experience it to really see whether or not my intuition is telling me do this or do that, make this choice or make that choice. And that relationship with self is something that no one can take away from you. Now you can get misaligned from it at any given moment, but this is where I'll just kind of put if you are in need of the accountability to never lose that part of you, to never lose that relationship with self ever again, regardless of what you're doing. You could, hopefully you're not going to be doing hard drugs where you're putting your life physically at risk like that, but you won't lose yourself in that because you know the healthy, secure version of you and how to find it. Okay. So that's my little lecture for the day. We're only at 40 minutes. I'm doing, I think, a decent job at like not rambling too much. But that is my first part one. I don't even know if there's another part. I feel like that was pretty conclusive to what a relationship with self and development looks like. But there are little things I remember, like when I speak about theory, this work takes longer than 40 minutes, but to just start you guys off in prompting like things to look at, taking that inventory, understanding your relationship with your emotions, building that relationship with yourself, and understanding how emotions are actually used and how you regulate will help you build more of a natural resilience, not only for what you go through, but then also just attaining things in life and learning your capabilities, your self-efficacy forms, your self-worth forms from that. That is the one thing that most programs, at least in my evaluation of whether it be a nutritional weight loss program, coaches and life coaches, what they miss is that relationship with self-development and really knowing all the different intricacies of like what trauma does, not only to the brain, but to the central nervous system and the body, that affects your thinking and ultimately that affects your ability to bring all of these things together. So didn't realize I was going to cry today, but there we go. So I hope you guys have a really good Friday, the rest of your Friday. I'm about to jump off and eat some food. And I had to go to workout this morning, good pump. Yep. I don't know why I needed to do that. I guess the 14-year-old in me is like showing off a little bit because this 34 versus 14, yeah, very different, but still the same. Still all right in here. And it's interesting. Maybe I even just realized too, I recently connected with a friend of mine who I got closer to around the age of 14. And I'm gonna see her this weekend. Shout out to Michelle. Like we may need to talk about like, what do you remember about me at 14? Because I don't remember a whole lot about me at 14. I just remember generally what I was going through and I was able to empathize, but it might be a yearbook kind of night. So, all right, guys, have a good Friday. That was my Friday episode of How to Align with Transformation and Applying Mental Health and Addiction Recovery in Your Life. And I'll see you. Am I going to see you next week? I might take another week off. Summer is just kind of a slower day. I've been trying to get to the pool. Got my little tan back. Can't really tell on YouTube because of the lighting, but you can tell on Instagram. But I'll let you guys know. I will post about it before I go. Enjoy your weekends.